Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. My name is Pastor Sam. I'm here with Matt and Dee for another episode. We are going through the book Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. Dee, if you could just hold up the book to show our trusty followers. There we go. That's the book that we're going through. It's in the link in the description. You're welcome to come and follow along today. We are in the middle of the book, I think. Yeah, almost bang smack in the middle. Chapter 11 and chapter 12. The emotional life of Christ is chapter 11. And then we're going to come to chapter 12, which is, you'll hear my rustling of the pages there. Chapter 12 is a tender friend. I do have to say I got more from chapter 11 than 12, but I say these things, then we get into conversation, and watch us not being able to stop ourselves. Watch us. You're going to say something, one of you is going to get me going. And then anyway, let's dive straight in, shall we? Chapter 11, the emotional life of Christ. I guess, I really felt like this chapter was trying to home in on the reality that God fully resonates with the ebbs and flows of how unpredictable my emotional state is, and that is quintessentially what it means to be a human being, someone whose emotional states kind of ebbs and flows, goes ups and down from joy to sadness, from anger to I don't know, gentleness or softness. And I feel as though there are certain aspects of God throughout my life that have been accentuated, and certain aspects that have been diminished. So let's give an example: the lion and the lamb. I wonder for you guys, do you feel that the lion was more prominent or the lamb was more prominent in the descriptor of how God is for you? Or do you think that you would describe it differently for you?
Think I'd probably go a little different, I think.
Okay.
Um,
How so?
when you say lion and lamb, I guess lamb is very obvious to me, like that, you know, I see that connection very well. With a lion, I associate that with more of something majestic, something you should be fearful, not in the scared sense, but in awe, kingly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I see that aspect of God. I don't know if I connected that to this chapter here
Oh, you didn't?
with those two,
Let me explain why I mentioned that phrase then.
yeah.
I mentioned that phrase to represent the active emotional state where I sometimes experience my humanity as a lion in
Mm-hmm.
terms of power, maybe representative of emotions such as anger,
Mm-hmm.
uh, um, the brutality of being human, um, the somewhat violent aspect of being human, the yes, bravery, courage. There are those aspects as well. And then the lamb, in the respect of there are moments where life is soft, where life is gentle, where life is peaceful. So I'm using that as an illustrative example for emotional
Sure.
presence.
Yeah.
The reason why I mentioned that particular example, because he does mention it briefly towards the end of this
Yeah.
chapter, is because I feel as though Christ has been represented sometimes more heavier in one emotional state
Mm-hmm.
than others. I feel like Christ, for instance, or maybe I feel like we as a group of Christians have represented Christ as the angry God more, or the forgiving God more, to try and to make mutually exclusive those two categories, where I feel like the author was trying to merge the two.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's why I mentioned it. I don't know if that
Yeah.
helps or not.
Yeah. No, I think I would agree with that. Yeah. And yeah, that was I picked up as well. It seemed to be kind of one of his keys here is interlocking both of those. Because I think
Hmm.
I agree. We tend to, well, we pick one, we pick the other. Honestly, sometimes I think we almost pick third option, which is both, but it's very selective.
Mm,
He's very much the lamb to me, but you over here, you are, deserving of a vengeful God, an angry God. Like
mm,
selective about who we choose God's emotions to target. But yeah, no,
mm,
there was I had underlined on page 103 where he noted like at least one of those aspects of like a compassionless Christ could never have gotten angry at all the injustices all around him.
right,
Like they're both necessary.
right, right, definitely.
So,
D, how have you experienced God as an emotional God? Have you experienced God as an emotional God?
Yes, but I mean, the Bible, both Old and the New Testament, is full of God's emotions, right?
Mm,
But I think that for me personally, I believe the emphasis was put more on the lamb emotional aspect of it rather than the lion.
hmm.
I say this because I think because we're looking at emotions from our sinful human perspective, I think it made us very uncomfortable to talk about or to see God in the light of having emotions that didn't seem to jive with, him being gentle and compassionate and loving and forgiving and merciful. To see this God angry, uh, it just didn't. There was a disconnect, and I think I feel like we felt more comfortable emphasizing the gentleness part of it rather than the angry part of it. Even though there's plenty of angry, God in the book, but as you read this chapter, you understand that, like Matt says, it goes hand in hand. I don't think you can separate out the both side of the emotions, and that his emotion is actually a perfect emotion, an emotion that was ours before sin came in.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that Matt said that helped summarize what his case was, the most prominent emotion that we've identified in scripture, or at least Dane identifies in scripture in Jesus, is compassion.
mm,
Um, many times when we say that word compassion, I don't think we factor in anger to be part of that definition, for instance.
mhm.
Um, I wonder if you guys can say a little bit more about that. Did you feel that Dane Ortland's inclusion of an example of anger in compassion was totally normal for you, or was that a new thing, or have you pondered on the concept of anger being a part of compassion before?
I mean, that's absolutely true.
Mm,
I mean, I think all of us have been in situations where we see something, or we read about something, or we experience something, and and there is that intense emotion of this compassion, right?
mm,
Yet there can be an anger, right alongside of that compassion, and in that, especially in the cases of just injustice, right? It's just, um so I can completely understand um why, again, that it goes hand in hand.
mhm, mhm,
and
mhm.
and that and that you can't but help have this, I think what he called the righteous anger, right?
Yep.
Righteous anger in in certain cases
Mm,
where there's a deep compassion that moves you, especially to action.
mm. Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, this was one aspect I think of this reading this week that kind of got to me the most about and caused me to reflect the most about, do I get angry enough? Like, they say that you can't have like you couldn't get angry if it was compassionless, right? And so
Mm.
it caused me to question, like I you see somebody who is needing help, who needs that compassion. And so, is it maybe pity that's maybe the analog to compassion without action? Like, do you actually need to get
Could
angry?
you say that one more time, please?
Well, so I guess so in my head, I'm viewing the idea that anger is maybe what drives you. You can have compassion on somebody or a situation that's bad, right?
Mm.
You can see that the homeless family on the street, their kids are there with no food. You can have pity on them
Mm.
or compassion on them, but would pity be kind of the analog to, you feel bad, maybe you're glad it's not you, but you don't necessarily, it doesn't drive you to address it. It's
Right.
like, is anger necessary to say, I am going to take compassion on this person here, but then my anger is not at that person, but it's at the situation that is causing that suffering.
No, I
And
totally get what you're
the
saying.
anger is what drives you then to address the root cause then. And so so that's where I was kind of wondering, terminology wise, is it maybe pity then, that you see that your heart hurts for it, but if you're
Mm.
not willing to go and really try to solve the problem or address the problem in some way, alleviate it more systemically, then is that maybe the point of anger? And
Are
so,
you suggesting for a case that pity without action is not compassion?
what I'm wondering, it's a definition thing, but that's what I'm wondering, right? Is
Or maybe you're saying compassion has to be with action.
it has to be with anger, right? Is kind of what,
Mm.
that quote that he said, is that if you don't have, basically, if you don't have anger at that injustice,
Mm.
right, it's not really, it's not compassion,
Right.
right? And so what is the purpose of that anger then? Jesus, where he used that anger, it was to address, and I don't want to say attack in a bad way, but address a lot of those, the money changers in the temple, the death that had stolen, the life of his dear friend.
Mm.
Um, it caused him to address the instigators of those harms in some
Mm-hmm.
way, so that not only do you have compassion on somebody, but you provided a shelter and a shield from that oppression.
Right. You asked a really powerful question that was piercing. Am I angry enough? And I mean, I'll answer for myself. No.
Yeah.
Um, I certainly am not. I have become somewhat desensitized to people's pain because of its normalization in society and the repetitive images of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I'll talk of my experience coming to America. Um, we don't, there is no gun culture in England. People don't carry firearms. We don't carry guns. Even the police, not even police carry guns. There's a certain group of police officers who do carry guns, but it's not something that every police officer does. So coming to America, I, I I remember I went to a friend's wedding and was having fun at the wedding, and I went to the bathroom, and there was some people I don't know, and there was a guy in the bathroom, and he was washing his hands, and as he had his shirt on, and he had taken off his blazer, and he was adjusting himself by putting his blazer back on, and as he was putting his blazer back on, I saw a gun holster on his belt, and he wasn't necessarily being a threat or anything. He just had his gun, and it was obviously in there. And I remember feeling so scared that I no longer needed to pee, that I I left the bathroom and waited for him to leave before I was ready. Like coming to America really kind of shocked me because even just the presence or view of a gun, I haven't grown up with it. I haven't even seen it. I see it in American movies. I see it, but that's like a movie. It's not real to me.
Right.
Now it's been 3 years I've been in America. I don't have the same reaction that I did when I walked into that bathroom when I see someone with a gun now, or even when I hear things on the news and I watch. Like there is a certain desensitization to that fear or whatever it is. I wonder if it is somewhat similar to the continual images of seeing those homeless people who hold up the signs at the end of the freeway.
Yeah.
As when I first came here and even in Portland as well, because there are so many of them that hold up those signs, my heart kind of sank. Now I just keep listening to my podcast.
Mhm.
And I think one thing that the writer was trying to allude to towards the end of the chapter was, I'm probably going to say it not in the best words, but I think what he was trying to say is if we are able to tune into Jesus's compassion, then we will be able to experience what it's like because he has the greatest capacity to not be desensitized. If I'm trying to, I think that's what I want to say.
Yeah.
I think that we as human beings run out of that capacity because we have normalized sin. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say.
Yeah. The last sentence he has in here is, um, Christ's heart is for you not only wash you in his compassion, but also assure you of his solidarity and rage against all that distresses you. I mean, that's in other contexts be very kind of a violent.
Well, rage isn't exactly a word that
we don't use it with God, do we?
No, well,
not our God. Like,
well, yeah, we don't see it as a positive attribute.
no.
Yeah, no, I don't think we do, but there is a rage that is justifiable. I think we packaged it into different words, like for instance, righteous anger, to make it sound a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
But and he describes this in the chapter when Jesus turned the tables in the temple. It's so we look at that experience, we do struggle sometimes to justify that as to what Jesus was doing. But I think Dane does a good job of helping us understand. It was the one place that the people could come to find solace and connection with God, to find forgiveness of their sins. And that place was completely being desanctified. So it stopped people from essentially getting close to God. And the rage that was behind Jesus because of the injustice of trying to even attempt stop people from getting to God because of what God can do for them was huge. And I certainly don't feel that kind of intensity as much as I need to, I think. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I have a question for you guys, just reading this chapter. Talking about going back to the word rage or fury or, intense anger. Have you guys felt such feelings, such emotions towards Satan?
Yes. One very specific time I felt it when one of my best friends passed away in 2019. I remember being at the funeral, and when everything was very, very clear to me, I was going through my own processes of denial and stuff. But when it just hit me, oh, he's actually passed away. And when I saw all the people that had shown up to the funeral and the impact of what my friend had on so many people and more who were online, rage came up within me because I felt like Satan had punctured the tire. And I felt angry at that point because I was like, how dare you? And I almost felt a little bit like, you know, I felt like, all right, soldiers, let's get our arms together and we're gonna defeat this. And like I probably in that week became the most resilient, evangelistically minded pastor I've ever been in a long time, because I just felt like you're not gonna win, Satan. And so the rage was directed towards my desire to win more souls, if that makes sense.
No, it makes,
I fully recognize I can't win souls, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely understand. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I've had such feelings as well. I mean, I think, um, you know, I think this is where I see like God's compassion and anger, rage goes hand in hand, in that I think the compassion goes toward the sinners, but the rage, goes to the Satan. I think I see this happening all at the same time. Of course, depending on situations and whatever, but I see this happening because I've experienced that myself, and and you have compassion, you have pity for these people, but you understand like why these things are happening, why people ended up that way. Or I know ultimately it's their choice, but not always. And you see the Satan's work behind it, right? And just your anger and rage just goes toward the Satan. And like you just said, like you tell yourself, or you tell Satan, like, you are not going to win. Like, I will not let you, like, I will not submit to you. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thought process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So shall we shimmy into chapter 12, from rage to a tender friend? Here's one thing that pointed out to me. You wanted to mention something, Dee?
No, I just saw what I underlined in the end of chapter. I mean, end of page 112.
Go on, you go for it.
It says, the indignation he felt when he came upon mistreatment of others in the Gospels is the same indignation he feels now in heaven upon mistreatment of you. In that knowledge, release your debtor,
Yep.
and breathe again. Let Christ's heart for you not only wash you in his compassion, but also assure you of his solidarity in rage against all that distresses you, most centrally death and hell.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was powerful. I will share one thing that connected to me in the next chapter, a tender friend. I feel like the whole chapter was really trying to just highlight the notion that Jesus is your closest friend. There's no one else who can be as a closer as friend as Jesus. He knows everything about you. You're safe with him. I felt like that was the repeating statement in different ways. And I'll explain it in this way in terms of one illustration. I remember one time I went on a visit. If there's one aspect I love about my pastoral ministry, I love visitation. I love meeting people and connecting with people and hearing their stories and being with them and spending time with them. I'd like to think that I have a large-ish capacity for people's weight of problems, that I can listen and work through and try to offer some kind of support if I can. But I remember I did this one visit. I came into this lady's house. There was someone else who was with me, and we sat there and we started the conversation, and she opened with telling me the story that she had wanted to tell me about the issues that she had gone through. For the next hour and a half, I couldn't even get a word in edgeways. All I did was and R and which is fine. There's no problem. There's a huge power in that. And I wanted to let her just talk. And it felt like she had so much to get off her chest. So she spoke and she spoke and she spoke. And he said this and she said that. And this and that uncle said this and this uncle said that. And it just kept going and going and going. And I remember once we hit the hour and a half, I genuinely started to get exhausted. Like my capacity was running low, my batteries were running low. And, I did my best to keep my composure. I eventually I felt like I had to step in and kind of interrupt and then try and, bring it to a close, offer some counsel, pray and stuff and leave. I don't think I necessarily did anything wrong per se, but I just remember the feeling of exhaustion with another human being doing something that I love. And I do love the people that I minister to, but I just remember the feeling of exhaustion. And I only mentioned that statement, that example to say, when I read this chapter, A Tender Friend, what really just pointed out to me is a God who will never be exhausted and has capacity for my deepest woes, which no human being can offer. Like, there are moments, where I just don't have the mental capacity to even handle being with myself. And that's why Jesus is such a relevant friend to me, and why I loved how this chapter kind of articulated that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share. And that's what I got from this chapter. What about you guys? Did you catch anything else?
I think even with our closest friends that we know that we can always go to, there are still things that we hold back even from them. And I think for me personally, one of the biggest reason is because I don't want to burden them any further. That honestly is the biggest reason. You feel bad. But I think with Jesus, you don't have to feel bad. I mean, you can seriously, he has the capacity to just take everything, and that's comforting.
Very.
Yeah, it's one area I had highlighted here was on bottom 114, where he talks about at the very least, what does it mean that Christ is a friend to sinners? And at the very least, it means that he enjoys spending time with them, which is a good description of a friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even that, I think, is a slightly different aspect that we're not always used to hearing when it comes to God, I think. We know he loves us. We know he wants to be, I don't know, I envision like parent figure or a mentor or something like that. But, and we hear he's a friend of sinners and all that. But when it gets down to it, a friend is somebody that you enjoy being around, right? And that's that's I think one really thing I've been impressed with this book is there's just different ways of, he's done a wonderful job of presenting these different facets that you don't always hear, or you hear a phrase and here's what it means is Jesus enjoys just being around you even, right? It brings enjoyment to him. So
I'm glad that you brought us to page 114, Matt.
yeah.
Because as much as he does a good job of highlighting some of these things, there is something uncomfortable. I don't disagree with him, but there is some uncomfortable that he presents here about Jesus on the bottom of page 114 when he answers that question, and he goes on to say, it also means that they feel welcome and comfortable around him. Notice the passing lines that start off a series of parables in Luke. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. And later on, he talks about the so-called uncomfortables of the time. They sense something different about him. The others hold him at arm's length, but Jesus offers the enticing intrigue of fresh hope. What he is really doing is pulling them into his heart. Here's what's uncomfortable by it. What's amazing and lovely by it is the fact that Jesus entices me towards him. And I love the fact that Jesus becomes so accessible and friendly to miserable me. But let's expand the horizon a little bit. There are people who, because of my biases and judgments, that I probably intentionally and unintentionally choose to disassociate around. There are people who I probably do not draw to, and I can't say that they are necessarily drawn towards me. And I can use the excuse of lifestyle. I can use the excuse of the things I like and the things that I don't like. But here's the picture that is given of Jesus in the Gospels. It is a God who ultimately is in love with every single human being on this planet, and so drawn to them that you can't help but be drawn to him. We are naturally drawn to people who take an interest in our lives and who we feel a sense of affection. As I go throughout my daily life, I choose who I want to be intentionally affectionate or inviting towards. I will be intentionally affectionate to all those who are on the membership list of Eastside SDA Fellowship, who attend our church, who walk through our doors, or to the families, or to those who are connected to the families of Eastside SDA Fellowship. But when I go down to Safeway and I buy my cabbage and I get to the counter and I scan it across, that I recognize that I don't even make eye contact with the person who has a name tag, where I could potentially have an opportunity to connect. Now, I bear in mind the reality is, there's so many different dynamics here: introvert, extrovert. Do you always have to be on the tip where you're constantly saying hello and engaging people on that deep level? I'm just highlighting the capacity of Jesus versus my capacity. And I'm highlighting the fact that God is challenging us to recognize that we have an opportunity to be beacons of affection to all those around us. And I'm recognizing wholeheartedly there are many moments in my life where I just do not have that capacity. And sometimes I just want to get my cabbage and leave. Don't ask me how my day is or anything. I just want to get my cabbage and leave. Anyway, I noticed that because every time I'm revealed more about this Jesus that cares, I'm reminded more about the Sam that doesn't. But there's this awkward tension I find where, am I supposed to do everything that Jesus is living out his life to do, or am I simply supposed to just admire what Jesus is doing and allow that inspire the aspects of my life to follow suit as and when? I know there's my tension. That's what I'm working with. I don't know if that resonates with either of you.
I think that each person knows themselves enough to know when you need to pull back. Like last Sabbath, I mean, like in all like transparency, I could not get my energy. I just could not see myself interacting with even a one person at that church. I could not see it. I tried. I could not do it, and I stayed home. And that's one of the biggest reasons why sometimes I stay home, because I just can't. And but otherwise, when I'm there, I try my best to try to get to, even just to talk and sit just even for a few minutes, especially people, who may be alone or whatever it is. Okay. And so I just know, and I know that God's okay with that. Yeah.
Fair enough. I think that makes sense, to recognize your boundaries and work with that.
Yeah.
So one final quote that I'll share right at the end of the chapter, which I thought was quite very powerful. Jesus is not the idea of friendship abstractly. He is an actual friend. I think that sums things up quite well. to be honest, of how we're supposed to see Jesus. I think I am going through a phase in my life where I am trying to move away from the black ink on the white page God to the personal friend God. And that's something that I am continually working with, because there was so much emphasis in my childhood and my teenage years on the memorization of the Bible, on the doing and learning of the academic God.
Mhm.
But the God that's very present in my life as a friend would be present to hang out is a God I am coming to learn the older I get.
Mhm.
Because that's the God that matters when crisis happens, when challenge happens. It's the God that really makes the biggest difference, to me at least. Any other comments before we wrap up, guys?
Good,
Okay.
good summary.
All right. Chapter 13 and chapter 14 next week. Chapter 13 says, why the Spirit? It's probably a good question, to be honest. And chapter 14, Father of Mercies. Dee, could you hold up the book? We are going through the book by Dane Ortland, Gentle and Lowly. It's in the description link. You can click on that and you'll be able to have access to the book. Would love for you to join the journey. We're halfway through, more than halfway through now, and we are enjoying this book. We will see you next week for the next episode of Pages to Progress. God bless you. See you.